Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning into the fourth ever video on my channel. I know, once again, it has been a little bit of a gap, just like there was in between each video so far, and I do apologize for that. If you don't know, I have my own D&D YouTube channel I run with a lot of content on it that I run with all my friends. It's called Hydra Studios. It should be linked below or somewhere on my account. And I additionally have Ultra Big Fella, which is a gaming channel. I just post clips to that, but it does take up some time. And despite the fact that I don't have a ring on, I am engaged. So I'm planning that, and also I just have a ton of stuff going on. So I do apologize for the slower stream of content coming here, but I will never abandon this channel. I will always add videos to it, make videos, because I love making videos. And this should be the first video in a series of videos that should be a series. Don't I have just a way with words? This is the first step in the Targaryen Kings of Westeros series, meaning that we have 300 years to cover. Therefore, a lot of content. Today we are starting with the first king of Westeros, Aegon the Conqueror, Aegon the first Targaryen, the first man named Aegon Targaryen, maybe. The first king named Aegon Targaryen. That's where he got the first moniker from. You are not named Aegon the sixth, etc., first, second, fifth if you don't sit the throne. Aegon the Younger was the second ever Aegon, and he in fact did pass away before becoming king, or he never was in line to become king, whatever you want to call it. He died, so he was not Aegon the second. But we will get into that far into the future, or soon actually. It should be the next video in this series, unless I'm misremembering. But that is not the focus of today's video. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I would love to talk to you about Aegon the Conqueror, the first Targaryen king of Westeros. Now, Aegon is one of the most intriguing and enigmatic figures in the history of Westeros. He was thought, like I said, to be an enigma by almost everyone around him, even those who loved him. His sister wives. Gonna be a lot of incest in this series. If that is a topic you do not like, do not watch. There is a lot of incest. Incest that is painted in a negative light. It is not glamorized or glorified by this series, unlike what some detractors of it will say. But it is, in fact, a heavy plot element. So, the first Targaryen king, Aegon I, the Conqueror, modeled after William the Conqueror by author George R.R. Martin, a man who united much of Europe through force. Let's just get into it. So, Aegon Targaryen would eventually become King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm, the first King of Westeros. But where did his story start before that? We won't get much into it because I want the series to specifically focus on the reigns of the kings, not their entire lives, but I will mention pertinent information that affected their rule. The founder of the ruling Targaryen dynasty, Aegon was born 27 years before his conquest began. He was born to Lord Aerion Targaryen and Lady Valena Valerion. He had an older sister, Visenya, and a younger sister, Rhaenys. In accordance with Valyrian tradition, Aegon married within the family to keep his dragon-riding bloodline pure. However, instead of taking only one sister to wife as was expected, Aegon married both of them. It is said that he married eldest daughter Visenya out of duty and youngest sister Rhaenys out of desire. The taking of a second wife was unusual, but not without precedent among the Dragon Lords. The children's parents themselves were cousins. There's also a possibility that Lord Aerion had more false-born children, otherwise known as bastards, which is something we will get into later. Before his marriage, Aegon had claimed the largest living dragon, Balerion, the Black Dread, and he aided many Essosi cities in their struggles in war. Balerion was a unique dragon, definitely. The largest known during his time, and black flames spewed forth from him. Balerion was a dreaded foe, as his name implies, a force of nature, and Aegon claiming him shows a bravery that Aegon has, but a bravery that is mixed with Aegon's inflated sense of self-importance. From involving himself in other conflicts to taking two women to wife, two of his sisters, to the events that we will come to see, Aegon is a person with a high view of himself. However, possibly unique to this story and unique to just men like that in general. he has this idea of himself that is high above, and he fights to reach it. Um, During this time, the Targaryens came from Essos, but they are a Westerosi house at this time for 100 years, I believe. So to involve himself in an Essosi conflict, not only does it set a precedent for all of his descendants to do the same, many of his Targaryen descendants eventually involved themselves in Essosi conflicts, but it shows how he was wanting a chance to prove himself consistently and constantly. And that's something we see through most of his life until he gets older and eventually doesn't care about that anymore. He cares about different things, which we will get into. The Century of Blood was a period of chaos in Essos, which lasted for approximately 1 century. It began following the destruction of the Valyrian freehold in the Doom of Valyria, which took place in 102 BC, or before conquest. Aegon made a name for himself, involving himself in Balerion in this conflict. Many cities in Essos fell in this bloody conflict, notably from mostly Dothraki forces. Perhaps Aegon felt like he had to defend these cities as it is what his honor demanded, as long ago, a century, the Valyrians and the Targaryens were SOC. As I stated previously, in 102 BC, the Valyrian freehold collapsed when the Valyrian peninsula was destroyed in the Doom. Within mere hours, Valyria was gone, and the freehold was destroyed. It is said that the fire and smoke was so hot that even dragons were consumed. The Targaryens are just one of the remaining Dragon Lord houses. The Valyrians and the Celtigars are two other Valyrian houses in Westeros, but the Celtigars are much weaker, and the Valerians, by the time of A Game of Thrones, are so much less powerful than the Targaryens, it's ridiculous. Many more Dragon Rider houses existed. The Targaryens were simply one of the only ones to exist. And the Targaryens weren't necessarily even in the echelon of the most powerful, nor were their dragons the largest. That really brings into mind the scope of power. They were only the survivors. There were much more stronger dragons and men than them. The destruction of Valyria strongly reduced the number of Dragon Lords left in the known world, leaving House Targaryen alone as the most powerful remaining. House Targaryen had relocated to Dragonstone, the westernmost outpost of Valyria, located in the Narrow Sea, 12 years before, with their dragons, thereby ensuring their survival. A dragon dream experienced by Daenerys the Dreamer had directed them to do so. The Valyrian freehold was in control of much of Essos after they defeated the old Empire of Geese and took control of the slaver cities, and forced the Rhoynar into exile. They become self-governed after this, and perhaps Aegon wished to remind the wise masters of Essos of the power of dragons. The slavers of Essos long ago were in control, and then they were deposed by dragon lords. Perhaps that's why Aegon in his youth involved himself in these conflicts, to remind them all of the results of their slavery. But as we'll come to see with a lot of things during Aegon's reign, it did not exactly have long-lasting effects. To this day, 400 years later, or 300 years later, Essos is still filled with slavers. Multiple characters in A Song of Ice and Fire become slaves in Essos. As the Century of Blood came to an end, Aegon's interest in war in Westeros grew. He had previously visited the Citadel of Oldtown and the Arbor in the Kingdom of the Reach with his elder sister Visenya, and he also visited Lannisport in the Kingdom of the Rock. It is notable that he chose Visenya for this outpost. He had much more affection for Rhaenys, his younger sister, the one he married out of love, not duty. But Visenya is a warrior, as Aegon. She is a strategist, as Aegon is. It is notable he took Visenya with him, possibly to scope out Westeros, or the most powerful regions of it. Because he was the eldest son of a powerful house, it would make sense for these to just be political shows of House Targaryen's presence. But the fact that he had his warrior wife Visenya with him gives me the impression, at least, that he was scoping out the most powerful cities of Westeros intentionally. Aegon had a vast wooden table commissioned, cut in the shape of Westeros, with a map of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros painted upon the surface. This map would be used for strategy by his descendants for 3 centuries. No borders were painted upon the painted table, however, as Aegon believed it should be 1 realm instead of 7. The Storm King, Argilac Durrandon, reached out to Aegon one day, proposing a marriage between Aegon and his only daughter, Princess Argella. All the lands east of the God's Eye, from the Trident to the Blackwater Rush, were offered as her dowry. although the lands did not belong to Argilac. His offer was an attempt to create a buffer between his own kingdom and that of Harrenhal, king of the Isles and the Rivers. Aegon spurned the offer, stating he had no need of a third wife, and instead offered his close friend and rumored bastard half-brother, Orys Baratheon, Orys, as Argilla's husband instead, in return for all the lands surrounding the Blackwater Bay, including those possessed by Argilac. Insulted, Argilac cut off the hands of the envoy Aegon sent and sent them back to Dragonstone. There's a possibility that Aegon anticipated Argilac's reaction and deliberately engineered a diplomatic incident that Aegon could defend against in the eyes of the people, making it look like he was wronged and he's only defending. One of his own was killed or maimed. Aegon called on his supporters to form a response to Argilac. After 6 days of consulting, Aegon sent forth ravens to every lord in Westeros, hundreds or thousands of ravens, declaring his claim to rule the continent as its sole king. Aegon and his sisters prayed to the Seven in the Sept at Dragonstone the night before beginning their war, though this was also seemingly more political than genuine, seeing as Aegon was not considered to have been particularly pious. Aegon landed with his army on the eastern coast of Westeros at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, where he constructed the wooden Aegon Fort. With the defeated lords gathered to the new Aegon Fort, Aegon was crowned with a Valyrian steel circlet by Visenya and hailed as king of all Westeros by Rhaenys. He also displayed the three-headed dragon symbol of House Targaryen for the first time, as House Targaryen adopted the Westerosi tradition of house sigils for the first time. Additionally, they took house wards for the first time, those being fire and blood, a reminder of how they conquered Westeros. The Targaryen siblings departed the Aegon Fort, with Aegon marching northwest into the Riverlands to confront Harrenhal. Edmund Tully, Lord of Riverrun, declared for Aegon and led the River Lords in revolt against the ruling Ironborn. When Harren refused to yield Harrenhal, Aegon told him, "When the sun sets, your line shall end." And it did. Aegon attacked the gigantic castle with Balerion, and House Horror was extinguished with the burning of Harrenhal. Of the 9 or 10 or so houses that have all held Harrenhal in the 300 years past Harrenhal's death and his entire family's death, every single one of them has had ruin brought onto them. You cannot find a different area within Westeros that was ruled by 10 houses on only 3 centuries. That is incredibly unique. Currently, it is owned by House Baelish, Peter Baelish, or Littlefinger's house. I'm sure that will bode well for him during the events of A Song of Ice and Fire. The next day, Aegon named Edmund as Lord Paramount of the Trident, and from that day on, House Tully ruled the Riverlands. Meanwhile, Rhaenys and Orys Baratheon defeated the Durandons in the last storm, while Visenya fought the Arryns and secured Crackclaw Point. Aegon's forces were decimating their foes at this point in the war. Nothing was able to withstand the forces of Vhagar, Visenya's mount, Meraxes, Rhaenys' mount, and Balerion, the Black Dread, Aegon's mount. Absolutely nothing. After regathering at the Stony Sept, the Targaryen siblings advanced against the larger host of the 2 kings. That would be Meryn Gardner the Ninth and Loren Lannister the First, the last king of the Reach and king of the Rock, respectively. The Targaryen dragons, Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar, allowed Aegon to achieve a great victory at the Field of Fire, which resulted in the death of Meryn and the surrender of Loren. Aegon then marched for Highgarden, where he named Harlan Tyrell as Lord Paramount of the Mander after the castle's surrender. House Tyrell replaced House Gardner as rulers of the Reach, and we still see those effects to this day. House Tyrell rules the Reach. And due to the surrender of Loren Lannister, House Lannister still rules Casterly Rock 300 years later. The Targaryens again reunited to face the host of Torrhen Stark, king in the north, but Torrhen chose to kneel to Aegon along the Trident instead of fighting a battle, leading to the men of the north surviving unscathed. Many people find this odd because, due to the events of the main show, we have, from Jon and Eddard, the main books, from Jon and Eddard and Robb and the Karstarks and the Manderleys, we have this perception of the Starks being the Northmen being these incredible warriors. The fact that they just bent the knee to Aegon seems foolish almost, but Torrhen, the king who knelt, is, in my mind, the reason why the North is the largest of the 7 kingdoms. Land mass wise, yes, it's the largest of all 6 others combined, but It's also the most prosperous, the most populated. Maybe not the most prosperous, but in terms of commoners who have love and affection for their kings, others might have mocked Torrhen, maybe even Northerners, for bending the knee. But if Torrhen wanted to do a rebellion years later, he would have the most men out of anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms. And every single one of his descendants has the most men out of anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms. If those three large dragons had brought flame and fire to the north, we might still see the effects of it to this day. The north might still have not recovered. Because, yes, they have so many men, but if fire was brought to them, they don't have places to stay warm after that fire. They don't have resources, if those resources, mostly wood for fire, to stay warm in the north, were burnt. It would have been very difficult. Torrhen is thought of a fool by some, but if you were in the north, I imagine you were very happy he bent the knee during the events of that. Visenya returned to the Vale, where she achieved the surrender of the Arryns, while Rhaenys flew to Dorne on an unsuccessful attempt to force their knees to bend. Aegon, meanwhile, marched to Oldtown, which was surrendered to him by Lord Manfred Hightower upon the advice of the current High Septon. This was a decision that put House Hightower in a very prosperous position, as for hundreds of years the Hightowers stayed close to the throne. Even at one point, their blood sat the throne, which we will get into when we cover the events of House of the Dragon and the kings leading up to that, and the kings during it, and the rulers during it, of which I will not spoil now, but I will in that video. Within the Starry Sept, the High Septon declared Aegon to be king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm. Aegon was officially christened in 0 AC as king of all Westeros. Aegon chose to date the beginning of his reign from the day that High Septon anointed him in Oldtown, and thereafter all Westeros used AC or after conquest as their dating system. Rather than ruling from Oldtown or Dragonstone, Aegon chose to make his seat King's Landing, the new settlement growing around the Aegon fort. He also took the swords of his defeated enemies, forging them into the Iron Throne, the rumor being that it was 1,000 blades worth. In the books, the throne sits 15 feet or so high off the ground. By the time of the Game of Thrones show, this throne that was made was very small and not as imposing. The logic being that in universe, Robert Baratheon, once he became king, took the swords away and made it a traditional throne. You can see an inkling of how the throne used to look in House of the Dragon, as it sits maybe 5 or 6 feet high. But if you look up a depiction from the book, it is ridiculously high, ridiculously imposing and terrifying. When asked about the notion of the chair's safety, Aegon said a king should never sit easy. Aegon also began in what would become known as the Small Council, as well as the position of the Hand of the King, with Lord Orys Baratheon becoming his first hand, his rumored half-brother. Aegon's first established law was the King's Peace, which forbade conflict in the realm without leave of the Iron Throne. Aegon treated the defeated lords with respect and allowed each region to retain its own laws and customs, and for the lords to retain both the right of the pit and gallows and the right of the first night. The former being the feudal law, granting lords the privilege of inflicting capital punishment and imprisoning people within their own domains, and the latter being a law that states that when small folk marry, their lord or king has the privilege to bed the bride on the first night. Something that is still in effect, somehow, 3 centuries later during the events of A Song of Ice and Fire. Aegon often traveled the realm with 6 maesters who educated him on each region's local customs and history. During Aegon's conquest, the lords of the Three Sisters had declared their independence and crowned Lady Marla Sunderland as their queen. Following his coronation at Oldtown, King Aegon commanded Lord Torrhen Stark, the new Warden of the North, to end the rebellion, and he sent Queen Visenya Targaryen on Vhagar to accompany the northern army led by Sir Warwick Manderly. At the sight of them, the sistermen abandoned their queen and installed her younger brother Steffon as their new lord. Steffon soon bent the knee, swore his fealty to House Arryn, and re-entered the King's Peace, ending the quite brief Sistermen's Rebellion. In the next 2 years, Aegon focused on expanding King's Landing and becoming learned on the customs and laws of Westeros. In 2 AC, Aegon turned his attention to the Iron Islands, where the Ironborn had been fighting for 2 years over their kingship. Leading the invasion of the Iron Islands by several war fleets, Aegon landed on Great Wick with Balerion to deal with the contenders. Aegon personally cut down Corin Volmark with Blackfire, his Valyrian steel blade, while the priest king Lodos walked into the sea, drowning himself. The other contenders quickly bent the knee. Aegon ignored the suggestions of making the Ironborn vassals to the Tullys of Riverrun or the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, as well as the suggestion to exterminate the Ironborn by Dragonflame. It is not stated which people offered their counsel, but I theorize it was in that order. Rhaenys saying that they should become Tully vassals in Riverrun, Visenya saying they should become vassals to the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, or Orys saying that they should become vassals to the Lannisters of Casterly Rock. And then I think Visenya and Orys also said that maybe they should exterminate their bloodline with the Dragonflame. I think it feels very in character for those three characters through different reasons and different means. Instead, Aegon allowed the Ironborn to name their own Lord Paramount, for which the Ironborn chose Vicon Greyjoy as Lord of the Iron Islands. 300 years later, the Greyjoys are still Lords of the Iron Islands, sometimes kings. In 3 AC, 1 year later, Aegon turned his attention back to Dorne, the only kingdom which remained unconquered. He first decided to try and bring Dorne under the rule of the Iron Throne through diplomacy, but after a year of negotiations and no progress to show for it, Aegon decided to take Dorne by force in arms. In 4 AC, Aegon launched a new invasion, continuing the Wars of Conquest. Though initially, the conquest of Dorne seemed to succeed, it unraveled quickly, and the First Dornish War prolonged and lasted for 9 years and knew many deaths and many tragedies. One of these tragedies was the capture and mutilation of Aegon's friend and hand of the king, Lord Orys Baratheon, by will of Will. Following his release from 2 years of captivity, Orys returned home lacking a sword hand, as did the men who had been taken captive with him. Aegon, intent on revenge, released his dragons and burned the castles of the defiant Dornish lords. In 7 AC, Aegon became a father for the first time, when his younger sister wife Rhaenys gave birth to a son, Aenys. A sickly baby, there were rumors that he had been fathered by a singer instead of Aegon. But once Aenys bonded with his dragon Quicksilver, his health improved and the rumors faded away quickly. The greatest loss Aegon faced during the Wars of Conquest was undoubtedly the death of Queen Rhaenys Targaryen, his younger sister wife, the one he married from love. She died at Hellholt in 10 AC when Meraxes fell from the sky with Rhaenys upon her back, after a shot from a scorpion, a large ballista mounted crossbow, took the dragon in the eye. The 2 years that followed thereafter are known as the Dragon's Wrath, as Aegon's wrath after Rhaenys' death knew no bounds. Aegon and Visenya placed bounties on the heads of the Dornish lords after Rhaenys' death, and in turn, the Dornish put bounties on the Targaryens. Aegon was attacked 3 times, with his guard saving his life twice. Visenya also defended her brother twice with Dark Sister, her Valyrian steel blade, said to be more fit for a woman's hand and lighter, which, once it's wielded by men later down the line, make it an incredibly deadly weapon. Albeit, it is still incredibly deadly in Visenya's hands, obviously. She saved the life of Aegon more than once. This led to the forming of the elite royal bodyguard known as the Kingsguard, with Visenya personally choosing the men herself. Aegon thought this was a ludicrous concept at first. He pointed to the men surrounding him, saying, 100 men are next to me. How could I be attacked? And then Visenya drew her blade and sliced him up the cheek before anyone could react in half a second, proving the point that he needed an elite force by him at all times. I would love one day to do a video on the history of the Kingsguard, every single member, etc. So let me know if that's something that would interest you. I'd probably end the video with theorizing on who will sit the Kingsguard for the king at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. Lord Commander Brienne of Tarth. My theory? No, not important. Perhaps. I have a theory that I would love for the main series to end with Brienne as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and Jaime as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but we can get into that in a much later video. Rhaenys' death shattered her son Aenys. Aegon grew desperate, and there were worries about whether or not Aenys would even live. The boy was only 3 and very sickly. As Visenya by then had not gotten pregnant yet, some believed she was barren, and during the times when Aenys' health was still troubled, it was rumored at court that Aegon might take another wife. Although Aegon refused to speak his mind on the matter, many lords and knights brought their young daughters to court. In 11 AC, Queen Visenya announced her pregnancy, and the next year she gave birth to Aegon's second son, Maegor, his 2 sons being Aenys and Maegor. The attempted conquest of Dorne was called to an end in 13 AC, after a visit from Princess Daria Martell, the daughter of King Nymor Martell and the ruling prince of Dorne. Prince Nymor Martell. Daria brought the skull of Meraxes and a letter with her, which was given to Aegon. After reading the letter, Aegon flew on Balerion to Dragonstone. He returned the next day and agreed to a peace between Dorne and the Seven Kingdoms. Aegon kept good relations with Princess Daria. He visited Sunspear with his eldest son Aenys in 23 AC to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the peace between the Iron Throne and Dorne. As we get later down the line, we'll have more theories to discuss that I will discuss. A mystery will happen, and I'll discuss every theory that I think has possibility. Truly, the only mystery during Aegon's reign, though, was the Dornish letter. So let's get into some of the possibilities for what that could be. Aegon was weary of war, and his advisors were urging him to continue it, so perhaps the letter told him what happened to Rhaenys, that she was killed by torture. Perhaps it was done under the leadership of Meria and not Nymor, and Meria asked him to end the war and instill her. A thing to note is that Aegon was enraged when he read it. He was seen bleeding after clutching the page while reading it, and he burned it immediately. After reading the letter, he flew to Dragonstone, so it is likely that Meryn sent, according to this theory, it is likely that Meryn sent Rhaenys' bones there, and it must have given him some closure, as when he returned he agreed to peace and was friendly with them ever since. This seems like a very straightforward and logical answer, but I think it is out of character for Aegon. Another theory posits that Rhaenys not only was alive, but she herself wrote the letter. Aegon recognized her handwriting, but had to compare it to other letters of hers in Dragonstone to be sure. The Dornish agreed to keep her alive and well if Aegon stopped the war. However, they will never release her, which is why Aegon frequently visited Dorne thereafter to see his wife. Another is that it was a threat to dump the last of the Dornish wealth into hiring faceless men to kill Aenys. Faceless men being this incredibly powerful assassin's guild. Aegon's new heir, Aenys, was under threat from this possibly, unless the war ended, and Aegon flew to Dragonstone to research these assassins. Another posits that Rhaenys lived through Meraxes' crash, but Aegon's wrath led to her end. When he sundered onto Dorne, it led to her death, and reading that information made him stop the war. I'm partial to this one as it makes his life much more tragic, and I think it's the most interesting. The final theory I want to mention, Rhaenys often was rumored to take lovers. Perhaps the letter held a confession achieved through torture that Aegon's heir was not his, and Aegon was forced to end the war, lest that information escaped and a civil war break out. We would hate for a civil war between Aenys and Maegor to occur. I'm partial to the theory that Aegon killed her, unknowingly. Regardless, the remaining 24 years of Aegon's reign were peaceful, so much that the last 2 decades of his reign were later called the Dragon's Peace by the Maesters at the Citadel. He spent much of his time consolidating his power by traveling throughout the Seven Kingdoms and burning his capital at King's Landing. Building his capital at King's Landing. I know how to read. Aegon devoted half of every year to making royal progresses, where he toured Westeros. That was most likely a lot easier when he had a very large dragon to go, but even if he just used horse, no other king had made such intense royal progresses, had been so involved in the lives of his people. During his rule, he tread carefully with the faith of the Seven so they would not oppose him. Aegon built a grand sept on Visenia's Hill and agreed to the construction of an even grander sept known as the Sept of Remembrance on Rhaenys' Hill. Due to there being 7 aspects of the 7 that are one, the religion that the faith of the 7 follow, their followers are called septons and septas, sept being the suffix for Latin 7, and septs are the name of the churches that they have. King's Landing initially lacked walls, and the likely reason is that the Targaryens believed no one would attack a city which housed dragons. However, when he learned about a pirate fleet sacking Tall Trees town in the Summer Isles in 19 AC, Aegon came to the realization that he and Visenya were not always in the city. As such, he ordered the construction of massive walls to be built around the city. Construction began in 20 AC and was completed 6 years later. Aegon raised Aenys at King's Landing and took him with him on his progressions. Occasionally, he let Aenys train with his Valyrian steel sword Blackfire. Lacking daughters, he married Aenys to a cousin, Lady Alyssa Valerion, the daughter of his master of ships, in 22 AC. Aenys would have 6 children with Alyssa, 5 of whom were born during Aegon's reign, and we will get into the lives of Aenys' children in the next video. After the year 33 AC, the royal progress continued, but were now made by his son Aenys, his heir apparent, and his wife Alyssa, while the aging king remained at home. By this point, late in his reign, Aegon decided that the ramshackled Aegon fort was not a suitable seat for a king, so the structure was torn to the ground. In 35 AC, Aegon moved his family and court back to Dragonstone while he commanded the construction of what would later be called the Red Keep. Visenya was placed in charge of the building of the Red Keep, and it was rumored that Aegon had done this so he would not have to suffer her presence on Dragonstone. The Iron Throne remained at the build site instead of Dragonstone since it was too heavy to be moved. In 37 AC on Dragonstone, while telling his two oldest grandsons, Aegon and Viserys, the tales of his conquest at the Painted Table, Aegon died from a stroke at the age of 63. He was remembered as, I said, an enigmatic man. Aegon was cremated on Dragonstone, and his funeral pyre was set aflame by Vhagar, Visenya's mount. Blackfire was burned along with him, but it was later retrieved from the pyre by Maegor, Aegon's son by Visenya. Although Aegon's reign had largely been peaceful, many of his subjects desired to go back to the days of old, when there were still 7 kingdoms ruled by 7 kings. Others wanted vengeance for the deaths of their loved ones in wars, and others saw the Targaryens as abominations. Because of this, the tumultuous reign of both Aenys I and Maegor I was filled with battles and chaos. Because Aegon had wielded Blackfire, possession of the Valyrian steel sword has been seen as granting legitimacy to its subsequent holders, and centuries later it would have rebellions and houses named after it. Aegon's small council was decently varied. Multiple positions of his council had only ever had one known member. His Master of Coin and Master of Laws were Crispian Celtigar and Tristan Massey, respectively. Crispian's inclusion led to the 3 Westerosi Valyrian houses, those being Targaryen, Valyrian, and Celtigar, staying closely bonded during the early years after the conquest. It is said that he later had a different Master of Coin, however, but we do not know who that was. In the position of Grand Maester, he had 3. The first, Olidar, was exceptionally learned but ancient in age and died the same year the office was made in 5 AC. Next was Leonce, who held the office for 7 years until he slipped and broke his hip and died. Then Gawain began his servitude in 12 AC. Gawain and Sir Osmond Gawain and Sir Osmond Strong, Aegon's current Hand of the King at his death, were charged with raising walls around King's Landing. Gawain continued to hold the office of Grand Maester during the reign of Aegon's heir, King Aenys Targaryen. Aegon's first master of ships was his cousin Daemon Valerian. Daemon died when the Vale of Aaron's navy assaulted his, and was succeeded by his son Aethan Valerian. Daemon's younger son Corlys also later became the first Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. The position of Hand of the King was the position under Aegon that shifted the most during his reign. Aegon's first hand was his rumored half-brother Orys. However, he quickly left the position to help Rhaenys capture Storm's End. King Aegon I then called on Lord Edmund Tully, the first man to bend a knee to him, to serve in the office in 7 AC. However, in 9 AC, Edmund's wife died in childbirth. Deciding that his children needed him more than the realm, he begged leave to return to his family at Riverrun, and resigned from the office. Lord Tully was succeeded as Hand of the King by Lord Alton Celtigar, who died of natural causes 8 years later. Sir Osmond Strong was the next hand. And 17 years later, in 34 AC, Osmond died in office, and he was replaced as hand by Lord Alan Stokeworth, who served until Aegon's death, and served his son Aenys thereafter. Aegon never had a Master of Whisperers, as that position was created after his death. A small detail of note. In the television adaptation of The Dance of Dragons, House of the Dragon, it is claimed that Aegon I had a prophetic dream about a second coming of the others, the White Walkers, the Whites, the icy demons to the north. And this played a role in his decision to conquer Westeros. Ryan Condal, the series creator, revealed in interviews that the idea came directly from George R.R. Martin, the author of the book series. However, the way Martin intends to introduce this notion in the books and its effect on the story remain a mystery, and there is currently no textual indication Aegon was a dragon dreamer. This would not be the only character that was made a dreamer by an adaptation. Just in House of the Dragon alone, off the top of my head, 3: Aegon, and then Viserys, King Viserys, the first, and then Queen Helena, Aegon's wife, Aegon the Second's wife. Both characters that in the books were not dragon dreamers, but were in the show. This isn't a negative thing, as I think that makes all 3 of these characters more interesting, but it is worth noting. He said the idea came from George, but George has had a lot of issues with how Ryan Condal ran House of the Dragon. Perhaps he was just like, how's this, George? And George is like, I'm 80. I'm rich. Sure. We don't know. Aegon's legacy was one of an incredible warrior, a skilled strategist, an incredible king, but I fear some of this legacy is just shrouded in the legend that came with him. He had 3 hulking winged beasts who shot flame and levied them against men who had never faced anything of the sort. He could be the worst strategist the Seven Kingdoms have ever seen, and he still would have won. He made a pact with the Faith of the Seven that was so hollow that it collapsed shortly after his death, and he failed to protect his heir Aenys from plotters who attempted to steal the throne from him. Almost everything he fought for fell apart soon after he was gone because he failed to put the work in to ensure it would stay standing after his death. His largest lasting impact outside of the government positions he created was just the construction of the Red Keep, the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, and it has withstood for 3 centuries. But he erected that keep by being like, I have control, I have millions of coins, other people that I trust. You erected this, and you do all these positions. If it had not been for the Valyrians, the Celtigars, and Orys, Aenys, and Visenya, and Rhaenys, I feel Aegon would be not remembered as good. And obviously, a king has his allies. That's what makes him an incredible king. But some of those men and women almost deserve more of a historical respect than Aegon in some departments, I feel. If Aegon knew of the others, if he was infertile, if Rhaenys lived, if Ors Baratheon really was Aegon's half-brother, ultimately none of that mattered, as the reigns of the next 2 kings led to more bloodshed and the First Targaryen Civil War. We will cover both the reigns of his 2 sons, Aenys the First and Maegor the First, next episode. They were back-to-back. Each of them was only, I think, 5 or 6 or 8 years. I believe off the top of my head, 5 for Aenys and 8 for Maegor, but we'll get that confirmed. They will be included in one video as we go over Aenys the Abomination and Maegor the Cruel, both first of their name. But for now, thank you so much for listening to me talk of the history of Aegon the Conqueror, and tune in next time for the histories of Aenys and Maegor. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. It was, I think, technically my longest video, but as a lot of it was just going over history, less rambling, and maybe it was more direct, and maybe it'd be easier to experience, let me know. I apologize I haven't posted more. I hope to. This series is the start of something that should be easy for me to create more content as I'm just going through histories, and then I could go through the history of the Kingsguard after that. It should be a lot easier. I have more video essays planned. I'm not just going to be going over histories of fictional worlds, although I'd love to do that more in worlds like Dune or Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. I would love to go over the histories of them. Maybe we'll do that after that. As for videos, I do in fact plan to continue more. I've said this before. I hate when I look at a video for a channel that it's an incredible channel and I love it. They haven't posted in years. If it's one video every 3 months. Right now, every 2 or 1 months is when my release schedule is. If it's one video every 3 months, I will make a video. I will never abandon this channel. I love making these videos, and thank you all so much to the people that are supporting me. It means a lot, genuinely. Yesterday, we streamed the 19th session, no, the first session of our A Song of Ice and Fire to TTRPG Beneath the Gold over on Hydra Studios. And Wednesday, we are streaming a one-shot where I'm playing a character instead of DMing. Very exciting. Our Hydra Studios channel has Star Wars series. It has a Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire series. It has a normal D&D series. It has multiple one-shots. And it has a superhero series. So if that is something that interests you, check it out, please. Like I said, I also have a gaming channel, Ultra Big Fella, where I just post clips. Maybe a 100th of them have my voice in them, 100%. Now, most of them are just clips without my voice. So if you just like cool clips, check that out. I believe that is it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. It really does warm my heart. All the support that I've gotten is incredible. And whether it's my recent video, which I think has less than 10 views, or my first one, which has 500, both of them I had so much fun making. I hope you are excited for the incredible. We're over halfway through the month, or halfway through the year of 2026, and we've already had incredible media releases that I loved talking about. Obsession was the most recent one I'd love talking about. I believe it just came out on digital, so maybe I'll make a video on that soon. I would love to do that. I had some insights into things that maybe now that it's been out months, other people might have, but like I had some insights that I feel like were unique to me. I'll say 2 of them now in case that video never gets made. I forget the name, but Bear's friend, the dude that sucked, people have been saying, oh, he just didn't know Nikki, or like he didn't know her and that's why he gave Bayer bad advice. I don't think he gave Bayer bad advice for flirting with Nikki. I think he was just a negger. Ooh, that's rough. Someone that negs, which is that's crazy. I believe that's British slang. I think we have a different slang for it in America. I'm in America. Spoiler. You can't tell by my accent. Basically, someone that does that is someone who insults someone as a way of flirting with them. I just think that's who he was. And I've known people like this in my life. Nikki went to him to get insulted and that kind of unhealthy flirting, and then she went to Bear for other flirting, or maybe no flirting. I think she liked him, but that's unimportant. Watch Obsession if you haven't. It's an incredible horror movie. And also something I think is very cool. She covers her face a lot, Nikki, when she's possessed or just in that form. And every time she shows it after, she has a gigantic smile. But we see briefly her in the darkness, and she looks old and ragged and like elderly and like sick. And she'll have a really cheery voice when we don't see her, but when we see her and she's in that way, her voice is awful. And we see she looks like that, and then she goes into the shower and she sounds cheery. I think it takes Nikki time for her body to recharge. So anytime she's covering her face and she looks perfect after, her body was getting away from that ugly, elderly look. Anytime she goes into a room and she sounds chipper, she's focusing on recharging. That's just two things that I haven't seen many people say. And feel free to make your own video on that if you saw this. I'll stop talking about Obsession. It's a great movie, but it has nothing to do with the topic of this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching the first episode of this series, Targaryen Kings. We're going over 300 years of history. We just went over Aegon the Conqueror, and next we're going to go over Aenys the Abomination and Maegor the Cruel. But outside of that, I have social medias that are linked in the caption. Message me. I'll let you know the schedule. I am not big enough to not respond to messages, so message me and I'll let you know the schedule of when the next video is coming out. Like I said, check out our social medias, Hydra Studios or just mine. That'll keep you updated. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.